we are going to be working on getting our Cornell notes that are going to help us to answer our or to support our claim. So remember, I told you you'd have a writing assessment, which was going to be to support the claim. Agriculture was one of humankind's biggest innovations. So today, we are going to get information from our books that's going to help us with that. And we're going to set up our Cornell notes. So here are the things that you will need. So first off, you are going to need your paper for your Cornell notes. So just blank lined paper. You are going to need highlighter. You are going to need something to write with. And if you have them, if you have an orange and a green pen or marker or something, that can be kind of helpful to organize your notes. If you don't have an orange and a green, don't worry about it. If you have other colors you want to use, as long as you stay consistent, that's fine. The reason I picked out orange and green is because in our book, the section headings are orange and green. So if you have these colors, you can match it up to what's going on in the book. Okay. So we're going to need to move relatively quickly today, so that way you'll have time to work on getting your notes. So remember, like we saw in our Cornell Notes video, the first thing you're going to do is take 3 fingers and use that to measure where to draw your line. Now, since my finger is a little bit bigger, I'm going to use 2 fingers. And what you're going to do, you're just going to get a dot to kind of mark your place. Okay? I know a lot of people are really concerned about straight lines. What I suggest is using your binder, so that way you don't have to waste time, unless you have like a little ruler already. You don't have to waste time. So remember in the video, it said the Cornell Notes had 3 sections, but I told you that our Cornell Notes would have 4 sections. And I'm going to use a Sharpie so it stands out a little bit more so you can see it better. Okay? Since ours are going to have 4 sections, what you're going to do is you're going to draw your line and leave 3 lines at the bottom of your page. Okay, so you draw your line and you leave 3 lines at the bottom of your page. Okay? Because remember, we're going to be adding a summary section. So what you're going to do is you're going to draw a line across, and then you're going to write down summary. What size? I'll check. I think I do, but I'll check here once we start working. Okay, so the next thing that we are going to do, because remember we have our different parts of our notes. So this part over here to the left, remember this is where we're going to put any headings, any questions, or any vocab words. Okay? So on that smaller box to the left, headings, questions, vocab words. On the bigger box to the right, this is where we will put our notes, any answers to questions, and any definitions. Notes, answers, or definitions. Depending on how we're doing our notes, you would put essential questions over here. But it depends on what kind of notes we're doing and what our goal is, which is what we're going to talk about with our title. So now, sometimes when we do Cornell Notes, our goal is to take notes on a video. Sometimes our goal is to take notes on a section in the book. These Cornell Notes are the notes that you are going to use to help you to support the claim that agriculture was one of humankind's biggest innovations. So for our title is going to be supporting a claim, because that's what we're doing. So supporting a claim. And remember, they said to, like our video said, you want to write your title pretty big so that way you know what you're looking at. So agriculture. So here's the claim that we have to support. Was one of humankind's biggest innovations. Okay. And so remember this claim, it was one of our learning goals, right? So it was LG 5, right? Supporting a claim, agriculture was one of humankind's biggest innovations. So if you're looking at home, this would be a point to pause it so you can see what to write. So I'm not going to keep it up there, but you can pause the video so that you can see that. Okay, now, the last thing that I like to do for the title part is I like to put where we're getting our information from. So we're getting this from our textbook, and it's going to be pages 21 through 32. So I write the pages where I found it, or where I'm going to find my information, and I put the date. Okay. Once again, this is a spot deposit if you needed to know what this looked like. Okay. So at this point, we have our title, we have our stuff set up. Now, since our goal is to show that agriculture was one of humankind's biggest innovations, if we're starting on page 21, so everybody turn to page 21. And for those of you at home, you can use Savas. This is topic 1, lesson 3. It was in our Google Classroom assignment for September 20th. Okay. And I will put section 4 on there so that you can see that as well. Okay. So remember, since we have a specific goal, our specific goal is to show that agriculture was a big innovation. So we only need to focus on the parts of the reading they're going to talk about agriculture. So if it's not going to talk about agriculture, we do not need to pay attention to that part of our reading right now. So the section headings, which are in orange in your book, and the section subheadings, which are in green in your book, can help us to figure out what we need to read and what we can skip for now. So if our goal is to figure out why agriculture was such a big deal, If we look at our first section heading in orange, when did people start to create art? Is this section heading going to help us to get notes to answer our question? What do you think? Yes or no?
No, I don't think it's because art is not part of agriculture.
Right. Art is not part of agriculture. Now, people might draw pictures of agriculture, but how art started is not going to help us to know about agriculture. So we don't need to read any part of this orange section right now. We could skip it because it's not helping us with our learning goal. Okay? So I look on page 22. Do I see any orange headings on page 22? On page 22, any orange headings, yes or no? No, there's no orange on this page. So we don't need to read anything on this page. What about page 23? Are there any orange headings on page 23, yes or no?
Yeah.
All right, if you see what it's called, everybody go ahead and say it out loud.
What do we know about Stone Age religion?
What do we know about Stone Age religion? So remember, if our goal is agriculture, is Stone Age religion going to help with agriculture?
No.
What do we think, yes or no?
No.
No. So we don't need to read this part right now, okay? So we turn to page 24. Do we see any orange headings on page 24, yes or no?
Yes.
All right, if we see it, what is it called? When did people start to farm? So if my goal is talking about agriculture, and this is talking about farming, could there possibly be information in this heading that will help me?
Yes.
Yes. So I'm going to need to read this part, right? So what I'm going to do on my notes is on the heading side, I'm going to go ahead and write down this heading. And again, you all have your book, so you don't need to wait for me to do this. So over here, I'm going to write down when did, and I'm going to abbreviate people again, people start to farm. Okay? So I have my new heading over here. Once I put my new heading down, the next thing I'm going to do before I start reading is I'm going to scan for any vocabulary words in this section. And I'm going to stop when I get to the next either green or orange section. So in this part, do I see any vocabulary words that are highlighted in yellow? No. And then I get to another green section, so I'm going to stop. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to read this the way Mr. Seymour would do it if I were taking notes on this. So I want you to notice how I'm doing this because this is the same process you're going to use. When did people start to farm? By the end of the Paleolithic era, human beings occupied many regions of the world. They had developed complex spoken language, learned to make a variety of tools and weapons, and adapted to different environments. Yet, in many important ways, their lives had not changed. They still lived in relatively small groups as hunter-gatherers, following the herds of animals that they depended on for survival. Then, beginning as much as 18,000 years ago, humans gradually began to learn, I didn't do what I normally do. I should stop at the end of every paragraph. So I should stop where it said, following the herds that they depended on for survival. So I stop at that paragraph and ask myself, was there any information in that paragraph that can help me to meet my goal? No, there was not. It didn't talk about agriculture. So now I move on to this next one. Then, beginning as much as 18,000 years ago, humans gradually began to learn a new skill that over time changed how they would live. By around 10,000 to 9,000 years ago, some communities were relying on farming for food. This development marked the end of the Paleolithic era and the beginning of what we call the Neolithic Era, or New Stone Age. Around this time, temperatures increased and rainfall patterns changed. Glaciers that had covered so much of the earth began to shrink. As the ice from glaciers melted, ocean levels rose. So I'm going to pause again and ask myself, was there any information in here that can help me to support the claim that agriculture was a big innovation? And so as I read it, I found two pieces of information that I think support the claim that agriculture was a big innovation, one of our biggest innovations. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a bullet point over here. And the first thing that I noticed is that it said humans gradually began to learn a new skill that changed how they would live. The other thing that I saw in here, because if we think about it, humans gradually learned a new skill that changed how they would live. Does this necessarily mean that it had to be agriculture? No. But that's why I wait till I read the whole paragraph to start doing my notes. Because I know that the new skill that they learned was that around 10,000 years ago, communities were relying on farming for food. And so if people are relying on farming, that's a big deal for it being a big innovation. Because they weren't just doing it for fun, they were relying on it. So I want to put that in my notes too. All right, so for the user at home, here's a pause point. So you can go ahead and pause the screen so you can get any notes that you needed from there. Okay, so in our book, we're on to this next heading, this green one. So if you notice, there are two green subheadings on page 25. How did people first modify the environment? And how did domesticated plants and animals change people's lives? Okay, so if you were to guess, just both of these, of course, are going to be somewhat important, but which one of these two subheadings do you think is going to be most important, Ariel? Probably the second one, right? So going in, I'm going to read the first one and I'm looking for information, but there probably won't be too much or as much as the second one. How did people first modify the environment? Others learned to modify or change their environment so that it would provide more food. For example, people cleared trees and bushes by setting them on fire. The grasses that grew back attracted grazing animals such as deer. People may have also noticed that if seeds were scattered on the ground, new plants grew there the next year. This discovery led them to find ways of encouraging the growth of wild food plants. So, for me, here's how I read this, and here's how you need to think about this. Our goal is to support the claim that agriculture was one of humankind's biggest innovations. All right? So I have to know what agriculture means. Remember, agriculture has to do with domesticated plants and animals, or domesticating plants and animals. Even though this talks about plants and animals, are these plants and animals domesticated or are they wild? They're wild. So there's not really much I need to write down from here. But now I know that agriculture has to do with domestication, and I see that this next subheading has domestication in it. So that's going to be something I'm going to need to write down. So I'm going to use my green pen, and I'm going to write down this next heading. How did domesticated plants and animals change people's lives? So I've got my new heading written down. How did domesticated plants change people's lives? So remember, the next thing that we do is we scan for vocabulary words. Are there vocabulary words in this section?
Yeah.
Yes, there are. Domesticate, revolution, reliable, and nomads. And remember, our vocabulary words go on that left side. So you need to go ahead and get those vocabulary words written into your notes. So any vocabulary words that are in that section, we want to write them down in that section here. And if you remember, our book highlights vocabulary words. So I'm going to highlight my vocabulary words. So that way, when we get back to our notes, those words will stick out. Now, since we have already written down the definitions, you don't have to write them down again. But what you're going to do is if you use one of the vocabulary words in your notes, just highlight it in your notes. So that way you can see how it's used. Okay? So hopefully by this point, we kind of understand kind of the flow of doing these notes. What you need to do now, what I'm going to give you time to do in your table groups, I'm going to give you 10 minutes to get your notes that are going to help you to show that agriculture was a big innovation from pages 25 and 26. Okay, we'll get back together in about 10 minutes to make sure everybody has the information they need, so that way you can have a chance to kind of practice this. Are there any questions on what we need to be looking for as you are reading? Okay, so you're going to read 25 and 26, and then you're going to do those notes. If your group gets done with that early, remember our notes go all the way to page 32. Does that mean that we need to read every single thing in this next topic? No, you're going to use the same pattern of reading the section headings to see if it's important information. Okay? But like I said, for this next 10 minutes, you're just working on getting your notes on pages 25 and 26. Are there any questions?